Hi, this is Andy Collin from Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. And I'm here with Chris Pomeroy, and we had so much fun interviewing Adam Kane for our Joiners Table podcast that we have decided to start another movie chat podcast with Adam Kane. So, hope you enjoy. So, let's start this film conversation with give me two double features that you feel are representative of, or two double features that have a big impact on, that you think would have a big impact on who you are or what you know
Double
what I mean?
feature.
Yeah, so like for instance, I might choose, mine would be something like Fiddler on the Roof and Dr. Zhivago.
Okay. Uh-huh. Um, I mean, I would have to say Apocalypse Now, um, and Blade Runner.
Oh,
Wow, those are good.
and
That's
what,
a good
how would you,
mix.
what would put those two together? Just that they were,
Um, I think they both follow a protagonist who is over their head, fish out of water, and have to. They're a bit of an underdog in their own stories, and they have to transform through a process to do questionably horrible things in order for the greater.
yeah.
Uh, if I had to sort of narrow it down, even because the genres obviously are totally different,
Yeah, that's
but
what I like about that double feature is it's combining completely different things. You
yeah,
know?
like I could do the same thing about The Conversation with Gene Hackman
Yeah.
and The Godfather, Michael Corleone. There's a lot of stories like that that I really that shaped me, I would say, as I was growing up that I identified with. I like underdog stories.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think for me, the other one would probably be something like, which was the first double feature I ever saw at the Wheeler Opera House, was uh, Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven. The two of them were two different cultures, same
But
kind
they're
of story, but it kind of gave you a shot of a time in America and a time in Japan that was kind
I
of a real
I
cool
th
reflection.
I think Magnificent Seven was borrowed from the Seven Samurai, didn't
Oh,
it?
it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
basically a Western remake. I mean, samurais and cowboys.
yeah.
But I
Um,
found that as an interesting twist. It was really, as a kid, that kind of got me thinking, wow, how the things relate to each other, and how you could tell one story one way and tell the same story in another way, you know?
so going back for me, it would be I mean I would my go-to would be anything of the Coen brothers, right? But before that, I mean, if we're going way back, I would say Harold and Maude
Yeah.
and the movie Wizards, which my brother and I went to go see in the theater. I think that was one of the first movies we saw in the theater. Um, the Wizards, obviously, the animation really interested me, and then Harold and Maude was just such a weird, funny, dark comedy that I used to watch it every year on my birthday. So we would go down to Pick a Flick and rent it,
Yeah.
and then Dean and me and whoever else ragtag of idiots would just sit around and watch that movie and usually one other like something like a Samuel L. Bronkowitz presents Kentucky Fried Movie or something, back when we were
I
preteens.
think the thing that got me about Harold and Maude was it was the first time that taught me that in crazy to laugh at tough situations, to find the humor in the absurd. And it was the first time where I actually saw that and it kind of struck me, and I
Yeah,
felt, I mean, it was cast perfectly, that movie, I thought.
yeah, yeah.
Hal
Is
Ashby
Harold
is amazing.
for the brothers love, right? Because that's a lot of that same real estate. The
Well, I
theater.
didn't hear you. What'd you say, Adam?
I was saying that's where there's a lot of overlap, Chris, for you with the Coen brothers, because that's also a theater of the absurd with
Yeah.
real
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
And you can laugh at things that are really dark that you
yeah.
maybe shouldn't be laughing at, right?
Right, right, exactly. Uh, yeah, we
But
saw. Blood Simple in the Playhouse. Was it Playhouse? That was what it was, right?
Ye-
Playhouse
Playhouse.
in high school.
I think it was the Playhouse. Blood Simple.
Yeah, and I remember the friend of mine that was sitting with us was such a goofball at the height of that movie. I think it was when Emmett Walsh's hand got stabbed.
Yeah.
This kid stood up and screamed at the top of his lungs. We were just like looking at him, going, "What the hell?"
It's
But
not. It's not.
it was good. It was effective.
I remember seeing Heavy Metal with Dave Jones.
Oh,
Oh yeah, that makes sense. That
That
makes sense.
was that at the ISIS? That was at the ISIS, I think, right?
I don't remember. Probably. I
Okay.
don't
Yeah.
think we've been at the Wheeler.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
But yeah, man, like those kinds of movies and Wizards too.
Yeah.
Wizards. Yeah, Wizards and Fire
Yeah.
and Ice was another one.
It's like that totally opened up my mind in the same way that the short film we were talking about, The Wizard of Speed and Time by
Yeah.
Mike Jitlov. Um, I saw that at the Aspen Film Festival, and that opened me up to a world of imagination I hadn't even considered.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was possible. Like, how do you even do something like that in a
Yeah.
movie? And it was really good for my creative spirit to
Yeah.
just know that there were the only limits were my imagination.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's it's interesting. There's the dreamers and there's the people who just want to be entertained. And the dreamers are constantly coming up with things. And I felt like watching so many obscure stuff, like the thing about the original Lord of the Rings and Wizards and Fire and Ice was that they were drawn characters, but they moved so real. Like you could see the person that was there, you know, and that was where I
Yeah.
was almost like you could see the drawing, but you could see the person, and visually your brain is sort of connecting the dots. And so it's sort of an interesting, weird world, you
That
know.
was the rotoscoping. That was something that Bakshi did a lot of.
I
Um,
mean, that was used by Disney in a lot of stuff, but I think Bakshi kind of really pushed it in an
yeah,
interesting way.
yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah,
And I think I don't want to say, some people will say rotoscoping is cheating, but I really think that it can be for sure, but if you do it like what Ralph Bakshi did, that allowed him to make those films full length features with with a smaller staff and a much smaller budget than say Disney or Warner Brothers or whoever was doing stuff at the time.
but
But
Wizards is a story, so for me, the technique is a part of it, but the story is what you're there for, and that's the creative part. And so I see it as rotoscope is a technique, it's a tool, it's part of, but it's the story that's the important part, you know. And I
mhm.
feel like that's where people have a hard time pulling those apart a little bit, you know. And I feel like that for me is I live in that world, so it's kind of interesting because I don't cheating is copying, you know.
Mhm.
It's making something just like what something else that someone did, but using tools to in other words, you spend more time in finessing than you do in creating the elements.
Well, I think that's the key. That's the key, Andy. And you and I have worked on stuff for rotoscoping where you can just trace it, but that's not animation. That's tracing.
Right.
Where it becomes animation is where you embellish on it and you push it to the next level. You exaggerate. You use in betweens. You uh, do stretches and squashes where they don't show up in real life. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Bakshi was a master of that. He pulled it off pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of a kind. There wasn't anybody doing anything like that at the time
Yeah.
except him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think people use his little tricks, and when he used it to kind of create the bubble, I felt like it kind of put it in a whole nother perspective. And it was sort of ethereal and sort of magical. You went on a magical journey, you know, and it felt that way. Or at least I did when I was a kid watching it in the theater.
So flipping back to your choices, Adam, Blade Runner is an amazingly prescient film. In some ways, I feel we're living through some of that now. Um, but in terms of like uh Apocalypse Now, I mean, that was an amazing movie at the time too. I mean, just everything from the scene with the guy with the puppy when he's, to Martin Sheen's psychotic break in that scene where he was filming, he was doing some kind of Tai Chi thing or something. And I read that he actually kind of had a mental breakdown, and they captured it on film for that scene.
He brought Hearts of Darkness, which was the documentary
Yeah,
that Coppola's wife did. So it's 16, it's real edgy, it's really kind of cool. He brought that and premiered it at the creative conference here in Portland and talked about it. And for the first time, he actually spoke about that whole incident. And it was live and on camera. You're right. It was pretty amazing. And it's a lot like what Orson Welles tries to do, is just capture the happy accidents. And those are the most powerful things in film. And that incident you're talking about was him sort of getting in. There was so many. He had a heart attack right after that. Yeah.
that's not ideal.
No. But when you talk about getting into the part and getting into that stuff, I mean, that's what he was saying, was that was a little too much. I mean, that's what Jack Nicholson was saying to Heath Ledger when he was being the Joker, was like, what, remember, this is a part you're playing. Don't go too far into it, because there is a line you can kind of cross. I mean, man, it looks great on the screen, but it can be hurt. It can really cause you some damage. And obviously with Martin Sheen, he had a heart attack. And he was young. He was like 32.
Yeah, Austin Butler talks about that after he did Elvis, the movie that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
He had a breakdown from exhaustion after they stopped shooting, and almost had to stop shooting before the end of the schedule because he was imbalanced in the way that he was approaching his life. But he's incredible in the film. He's transparent. It's pretty wild when people have the ability to do that. It's affecting.
Well, and that's what makes those movies, I think. It's the unexpected thing, but that's with the magic, that you don't know why you like it, but you do, because you can sort of see that the person's, I mean, just diving into it. I mean, Jamie Foxx and Ray was another one that was.
There's people that transform roles, and there's people who perform roles.
Right.
And they're not the same thing. When I watch a movie with Sam Jackson, I'm always watching Sam Jackson play a role, but it's always Sam Jackson.
Right.
Right.
And by the way, like, that's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
When you watch a movie with Gary Oldman, for example,
Oh yeah.
he transforms into a character that you take the ride with, and you're no longer watching Gary Oldman.
Right.
And there is a difference.
Willem Dafoe is like that too. He can be.
I'm sorry.
Willem Dafoe can kind of.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
like that as well. And he comes from a deep theater background, so that's very much the directive. That's the mandate, is get lost.
It's funny. That's one thing. Since you are a director, it would be interesting to hear your spin on stage actors versus just people who have been in films and doing stuff. What you bring to the table is different. As a director, how do you work with actors like that? You know what I mean?
It's a lot of it is you have to do detective work if you can before you get to working with them. Sometimes that means calling people that know people who may know people who may have worked with them.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of that when I get on a project, especially if I'm also producing. I want to know the kind of person that I'm going to be working with so that I can protect their process as much as is reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I also find out a lot by having a meal with somebody, because you can really get to the root of how they work, and I can ask questions. For example, when I worked with Michael Sheen on a show called Prodigal Son, which I produced and was a director on in New York in 2019, 2020, I flew to the UK to have dinner with him. Uh, and it was really, really helpful to be able to sit and say, in a scene, do you want to go first on camera? Do you want to be last? Do you want time to warm up? Like, do you have a preference?
Right.
And some people say, definitely go last on me if you can. Some people shrug their shoulders like he didn't say, whatever, like it doesn't matter, like whatever works for you.
Right.
And it's helpful to know those things about someone's process. Um, and there's always the requisite, how did you get into acting kind of conversation, which is amusing sometimes, but also really helpful.
Right.
Because somebody like Willem, who I did work with on the Boondock Saints, hearing his whole comeuppance through the theater, the New York theater scene, was really it was really informative on how he worked on set and what he was hoping to get back from directors in terms of his own process, because Willem is the kind of guy who he wants to be pulled back from doing too much, which is not an uncommon, and Dean can probably speak to this quite well, but it's not an uncommon sort of reaction from a theater actor who's theater trained,
Right.
because they're playing for the back row. They're
Right.
not, camera, when you're in a close up, you can do the subtlest of moves as an actor and have the most effect. Whereas on stage, if you're playing at a sizable theater, you can't be playing for people in the front row because the people that are in the back are going to completely miss it. There's a different kind of physicality that
Right.
is required of the body and of a performance in order for it to land. And in film, it's a different kind of technique. So somebody like Willem comes out and he's got an idea, but really he wants to fit into the world that's being created in a movie or a TV show or whatever he's doing.
Right.
So he often will go too far and want a director to say, do less, pull back,
Yeah.
let's focus on this. That's his method.
Uh-huh.
There are other people that want to be pushed to do more. There's other, Michael Sheen wanted specifics.
Right.
If we were going to play with a couple different emotional colors in the scene that I was directing, he didn't want to do it improvised in the moment, where some actors would rather do that so they don't overthink it. They can just feel it. But he wanted to know, okay, are we doing a sinister version? Are we doing a sympathetic version? What are we doing? And then he wanted to be able to spend 10 seconds thinking about that in his chair while the final lighting tweaks were happening so that he could be prepared. That's his process. And so it's a lot of exploratory investigative work if you're doing it the way that I feel that it's helpful. In my experience, it has been helpful to understand how people tick, because
Right.
otherwise you're finding out in real time and you may stumble upon a sensitive, little scar in an actor that you don't intend to touch, but ends up, kind of taking them out of the moment for a take or a scene or
Hmm.
whatever. And that's not helpful either. So it's really just about exploring the human condition. And there's a way to do that.
I
So
heard I
does
heard
casting help let me put it this way. The way while you were talking, I was thinking about it. In terms of screenwriting, we can go through all kinds of different things to try to figure out what type of a character it can be played by who. There's there's a weird dichotomy there in that the older folks and the folks who are more in the know, like Willem Dafoe, they understand that a screenplay is exactly that. It's a play for the screen. But now you have this whole nother world of the whole influencers and reality TV and everything else. Does casting kind of weed that out before it ever gets to your chair? Because I can't picture a scene that would work in, let's just say, a drama with a Willem Dafoe or a Denzel Washington acting alongside uh Johnny Knoxville or somebody. I can't see it happening.
Yeah, those kinds of actors would never be in those movies because they've got approval often over who else is in the main roles of the cast.
Yeah.
So they're not
I'm
going to allow.
thinking of what was the vampire movie with Keanu Reeves and Anthony Hopkins in it? I
Dracula.
just remember
Bram
I remember
Stoker's
seeing
Dracula.
that and seeing him across the table from Anthony Hopkins, and Anthony Hopkins delivers his lines, and Keanu gets to his, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I was down in Budapest," and I
Yeah.
was just like, "Those are two worlds are colliding there." You know? Just-
Like, people jump on movies like that because of Francis Ford Coppola.
yeah,
Right.
They don't jump on the movie because of the actor necessarily. Coppola was a multi-Academy Award winner. He was a legend. I think that movie was made in the 90s,
Yeah.
yeah,
Stoker's Dracula. And everybody wanted to work with the director of Apocalypse Now and The Godfather.
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And not to rip on Keanu, I think the older I get,
hear
the
that,
more
Chris.
awesome a person that guy is. You know what I
I,
mean?
it's
But
it's funny because Spielberg is such a commercial director, but the one movie where I felt like he actually like you're talking about getting to know the cast and working with the cast and pulling from the cast, letting them kind of shape the movie. I think Color Purple was a perfect example of that, where the characters kind of took on their own role. He helped guide them around, but it felt to me the way a lot of the people talk about working on that cast was that there was a lot of back and forth with the individual actors and the director.
I don't
Yeah,
think on a movie like that you'd have to approach it like that because it's a black story.
right, right.
And Spielberg is a white Jewish guy who
Yeah,
has no history in that. So to have a healthy exchange with people who have a sense of that kind of history is really important. Like to be empathetic, sympathetic, understanding, that is part of the job of being a director, in addition to guiding and leading.
it is. But I also think that's what made that movie so special. The reason why it tugged on the heartstrings was because people poured so much of themselves into it that you could
Important.
actually, you felt it. It just jumped right through the screen and right into you, you know?
Yeah. I think the best movies are that like that. Like, The Killing Fields was like that for me.
Yeah, yep.
That was a seminal movie growing up. I don't, I still to this day, like it, I watch it every few years because it just reminds me that in the world we may speak different languages from people, we may have different skin color, we may have come up in different socioeconomic or cultural backgrounds, but in the end, we're all just people, and
Right.
yeah,
people want
yeah,
simple
yeah.
things. They
Andy and
want
I were talking about that the other day, with the
to
juxtaposition of,
secure life, like they just want to be able to have the same things that we do in this continent.
yeah.
Right.
What was the Letters from Iwo Jima?
Oh yeah, that was a double feature where I felt like it showed the power
Yeah,
of
yeah,
Clint Eastwood as a director, where the thing about news, news is no longer news; it's entertainment. Walter Cronkite used to say this was this side, and then the next night he'd show you the next side. And I felt like it's amazing for a director to be able to do something like that, where Clint Eastwood did that with Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, where you really felt both sides from this event that was so powerful, and to be able to step into one side and to be able to step into the other side. I felt like that was it really showed that Clint Eastwood learned a lot from the directors that he worked with. I
I don't know
felt.
if you
yeah.
saw Edward Berger's movie All Quiet on the Western Front, which won the foreign best foreign film at the Academy Awards. But
Phenomenal.
it is exactly that, Andy. It
Yeah,
is German view on the same story, and I thought it was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. It's so heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah.
The
yeah.
what every human being who endured that war had to go through. Um, so I love that perspective. Movies is unique that way. They are unique in that sense.
And to add on to that, which is interesting, a movie I saw at Telluride was called Zone of Interest. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Seen it, yeah.
It's like the number, if you're going to show a movie of how a soundtrack is the power of the film and can drive a film, that film is a perfect example because you see things, but you hear things. And so it's not always what you hear is what you see. Do you know what I mean? And so you're watching it and you're listening to the effects and the things that you're hearing, but there's all this other story that's going on off the screen that you sort of can pick up on, and it's almost like you need to see the movie twice to really soak it in. And I felt like it's such a perfect example of, everybody, it's all about camera and it's all about this and it's all about the music and all about that. But the soundtrack is so important. And I felt like that film really showed that,
Sound picture.
Yeah.
So
kind of pull this around full circle on the perspective from both sides. One of my favorite scenes in a movie was We Were Soldiers. I'm not sure if either of you seen it. You probably have, but where Mel Gibson goes to church to pray, and he's praying to God, to help watch over his men, and he goes into this really beautiful, just a way of honoring his soldiers, and then he says amen, and then he comes back and he says, oh yes, and one more thing, dear Lord, about our enemies, ignore their heathen prayers and help us blow those bastards straight to hell. I was just like, clearly they're praying to God about the same thing on the other side. It was just always cracked me up,
Nothing like good old-fashioned empathy to bring you through.
Exactly.
Hi, this is Andy Collin from Growing Up Aspen, and I'd like to thank you for listening in to the chat with Chris Pomeroy and Adam Kane, talking about film, and wish you the best, and would like to encourage folks to attend local art house theaters. The small last theater in our hometown of Aspen is about to shut down, so we'd like to draw attention and hope that people keep these theaters alive. Also, the authors of Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. If you're interested, our book can be purchased at twistandturnpress.com or any local bookstore. Thanks.